Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Tuesday, June the 11th, 2024. Our question of Did you ever have a question had to do with the writing of Revelation this past Sunday. When was it written? Why were no other books written? And I did my best in a rather lengthy sermon, unfortunately, to answer those questions, but it leaves a whole lot of other questions unanswered. And so we're going to spend this week talking a little bit more about the book of Revelation. In general, about who wrote it, in particular, as much as we understand, and so forth. And then also about the books of the Bible. Why were some included? Why were some not? And what are some of the ones that were not? So hope to explore a lot of that with you this week. I know I call this Daily Devotions, and a lot of times it ends up being more of a Bible study. I apologize if... but I kind of go back and forth between the two. This is going to be more Bible study-ish, if you will. The information I'm about to share actually comes from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and a lot of interesting things they had to say about the book of Revelation. Of course, it's the last book of the Bible, and they say it's something that we all would agree with, one of the most difficult to understand, because it is full of a lot of unfamiliar and extravagant symbolism, which at best appears unusual to the modern reader. But symbolic language, they point out, is one of the chief characteristics of apocalyptic literature, and this, of course, is an outstanding example. Such literature, this apocalyptic literature, enjoyed wide popularity in both Jewish and Christian circles from about 200 BC, or the new designation is BCE, before the Common Era, to 200 CE, or the Common Era. We don't mark things like by before Christ in the year of our Lord anymore, more general sense, before the Common Era, the Common Era. But it contains an account of visions in symbolic and allegorical language borrowed extensively from the Old Testament, especially the books of Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Daniel. And they make a point here that whether or not these visions were real experiences of the author or simply literary conventions employed by him is kind of an open question, and people and scholars go back and forth. But this much, they would argue, is certain, and I would agree. Symbolic descriptions are not to be taken as literal descriptions, nor is the symbolism meant to be pictured realistically. One would find it difficult and repulsive, for example, to visualize a lamb with 7 horns and 7 eyes, and yet Jesus Christ is described in exactly those terms in Revelation 5, verse 6. What they do is they go on to explain the author uses these images to suggest Christ's universal, the number 7, power, the horns, and knowledge, the eyes. So a significant feature also of apocalyptic writing is the use of symbolic colors and metals and garments and numbers. Again, the number 4 signifies the world. The number 6 signifies imperfection. 7, totality or perfection. 12, Israel's tribes or the apostles. And 1,000, immensity. So you have to take those numbers in terms of what they have tended to represent in the Bible. And finally, there's some vindictive language in the book of Revelation that's also to be understood symbolically and not literally. The cries for vengeance on the lips of Christian martyrs that sound so harsh, they would suggest, are in fact literary devices that the author employed to evoke in the reader and the hearer a feeling of horror for the apostasy and rebellion that will perhaps be severely punished by God. They go on to say that the book of Revelation cannot be adequately understood except against the historical background that occasioned its writing. In other words, like Daniel and other apocalypses, it was composed as resistance literature to meet a crisis. The book itself suggests that the crisis was ruthless persecution of the early church by the Roman authorities, the harlot Babylon in Revelation symbolizes pagan Rome, the city on 7 hills. The book is then an exhortation and admonition to Christians of the first century to stand firm in the faith and to avoid compromise with paganism, despite the threat of adversity and martyrdom. They're to wait patiently for the fulfillment of God's mighty promises. The triumph of God in the world of men and women remains a mystery to be accepted in faith and longed for in hope, they say. It's a triumph that unfolded in the history of Jesus of Nazareth, that continues to unfold in the history of the individual Christian who follows in the way of the cross, even if necessary, to a martyr's death. And going back to the numbers and the symbolism and everything else, one of the things I remember from the class in Revelation I took in seminary, and a little bit of reading that I've done over the years, is that all this symbolic language and everything is almost like code, that the people, the Christians of that day, especially those who are well versed in the Old Testament, where there's a lot of this stuff comes from, would understand what the writer was saying. Their enemies, who in fact we believe were persecuting them, would not understand necessarily what they were talking about. The only problem is that now, all these years later, we don't really understand all of the symbolism. We take guesses. We have a pretty good idea in some instances, again, but a reminder that it's symbolic, not realistic. And we'll have more to say. We'll continue to unpack this as much as possible in the days to come. But again, the bottom line, as one of the people who left church on Sunday said, because my last story is the famous story of, what does the book of Revelation mean? They asked an old janitor who was reading the book, and he said, well, I do know the answer. Well, what is it? God wins. Basically, that's what the book of Revelation says, God wins. And that's in directly opposite of how the book of Revelation is often used in our time, in terms of not denying that part of it, but scaring us and making it seem like all these terrible things, when really the basic message is a message of hope and promise that God, in fact, will win. In fact, already has won, even though there is still suffering and pain in the world to this day. Well, again, we'll pick it up again tomorrow. Hope you have a great day today. We'll see you again tomorrow. Until then, take care. Bye.